2020 has been a bit of a mess with little to celebrate, and I'm sure I won't be alone when I say I'm bored of working from home and desperately need to travel. So we need a bit of spice, a bit of excitement to fire us up. Well, this year that came from an unusual source in the form of Rolex. A company known for its glacial model deployment has taken a jump on the vaccine scientists to deliver the healing powers of colour this autumn. Yes, I'm talking about the 2020 Oyster Perpetual. This model has gone from languishing in display cabinets to trading at nearly twice list price just by adding colour. Oh, and pretending they're in short supply, of course. So a few weeks ago, I was invited to my local Rolex Authorised Dealer for a preview of the entire 2020 Rolex watch releases. They cleared the whole shop and had the complete range available to try on. So who was I to say no? I'm Andy, and welcome to The English Watch. In this episode, we'll have a good look at the Oyster Perpetual, its long-standing history in Rolex's lineup, and the success story from the 2020 model launch, and where I found most interest. Yes, more interesting than the Submariner. Before we get started, if you like this content, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. You can find me on Instagram at The English Watch, where I update regularly, but also on Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to ask me a question, you can direct message me through my Instagram or drop me an email. I'll leave a link in the description. I'll also leave a link to my website, theenglishwatch.com, where you can find some helpful guides and tips. Normally Rolex release their novelties at Baselworld, but as we know, 2020 has not gone to plan, so digital marketing has replaced the old-fashioned conference-style events. There was a chance we weren't going to see any Rolex releases this year, and have to wait for a physical event in 2021. But this was not to be, and we finally got what we wanted on the 1st of September 2020 with the release of an updated Submariner, a new range of Oyster Perpetuals, and some updates to other models. With the teaser videos on the run-up to the launch, there was so much hype around the new Submariner, or at least that's where the smart money was. What am I wearing today? Well, it's my Rolex Submariner 116610 LN. It's the old style case with the old style movement, still one of the most comfortable watches I've ever worn, and certainly the most comfortable one in my collection. So today I'll focus on the surprise release of the new range of Oyster Perpetuals. Now the OP is the longest running range in Rolex's lineup, not necessarily in design, but certainly in name. The main thing it had going for it recently was the lack of availability of the watches you actually wanted, like the Explorer and the Submariner, and so a bit of a consolation prize. The previous generation Oyster Perpetual was only released in 2014, and 6 years isn't a long run considering the Submariner reached 10 years. Released in 26, 31, 34 and 36mm sizes, a watch range targeted at the smaller wrist with subdued colours, mimicking the Datejust range. The 39mm was added a year later in 2015 in very business-like colours, and to appeal to the larger wrist and bring it in line with the Explorer on size. This should have been a fun entry into Rolex ownership, sitting alongside the similar but sportier Explorer that shares so much of its DNA with the Oyster bracelet and being a simple three-hand watch. And despite a few gems like the red grape, it's no surprise why these watches languished in display cases, being a bit too sensible for their own good, with the Explorer just out of range for most, ascending to unobtainable status. So this was a watch for those that like simple, dressy nature, but without a date complication like the Datejust, but would also put up with the lower refinements, such as a plain clasp, and appreciating the lower entry cost. The dials were very accomplished, with silvered sunburst radial effects, but were very one-dimensional and flat. And it's fair to say that the 39mm did have a strong following with those classic proportions that some may say were perfect and lament the new 41mm case size. Now before we get into the new models, let's take a look back at the history of this model that offers its name to pretty much every watch in the Rolex lineup. You will have noticed that Rolex aren't shy about printing text on their dials, and you'll see the words Oyster Perpetual printed at the top of pretty much all of them. So what does it mean? Well, the Oyster case was first used in 1926 and featured a screw-down case back, bezel and crown, giving it new levels of water resistance. The ridged screw-down bezel has the hallmarks of today's Datejust and is mimicked on the case back of the modern watches, where a special tool is used to apply a tight seal. Now Rolex's founder, Hans Wilsdorf, being a master at marketing, heard of a British woman named Mercedes Gleitz, who had successfully swum the English Channel. At a time when brand ambassadors weren't really a thing, Wilsdorf spotted an opportunity and asked Mercedes to wear a Rolex Oyster watch around her neck for the next attempt. Sadly, on this occasion she didn't make it, but lasted a grueling 10 hours in the freezing water. But despite this failure, Wilsdorf placed an ad in the Daily Mail hailing this watch the wonder watch that defied the elements, cementing not only the very important partnership between Rolex and Mercedes, one that would last for years, but also providing Rolex with a USP, something to build on, that would later see them as the tall watch manufacturer of the professional, and later the watch everyone wants. Rolex have been a marketing juggernaut for nearly 100 years, and it all started in the English Channel. The word perpetual is the word Rolex used to describe a watch with a self-winding system. And despite its early claims, Rolex didn't invent the self-winding watch. That was by John Harwood in 1924 with a patented hammer-type winding system that oscillated back and forth like a seesaw, and that's what he took inspiration from. In 1931, Rolex patented a self-winding movement that used a rotor turning through a full circle. They called it perpetual, as the watch would be perpetually wound while the wearer swung their arm. In 1956, Rolex would later write a note to apologise to John Harwood in the Sunday Express for its claims at being the first, but clearly Rolex had already made their mark. To fit the winding rotor into the case, it needed to be elongated, giving rise to the bubbleback name for those early watches. Roll forward now to 2020, and Rolex presents the new generation of its Oyster Perpetual watches, alongside its new Submariner, and with it another surprise replacing the 39mm with a larger 41mm. The move to a larger size is no real shock, given the steady size increase in watches in general over the years, and this one now goes toe-to-toe with Omega's larger Aquaterra for size and price point, both using their traditional case designs, and with Omega still offering a 38mm version. Where Rolex have stolen a march though is in the explosion of colours on the dials. All lined up, the dials are so rich and glossy you could be looking inside a range of paint tins ready to apply to that feature wall. But there's clear influential trends in other luxury brands that could have you matching your watch, car and phone if you were that way inclined. As you may have read elsewhere, this is not Rolex's first foray into the use of shocking colours. The 70s saw the introduction of colourful enamel dials to the Daydate range, referred to as lacquered Stella by Rolex themselves. These were not that popular and the enamel had a tendency to crack, so were not made in significant numbers. Needless to say, these are now highly collectible. We also saw a bit of a strange move by Rolex recently, where they filed and won trademark infringements against a customization outfit called Californienne. This company would take used Rolexes and give the dials and straps a bit of a colour boost. Now Rolex claim the use of the Rolex logo infringes their trademark and may confuse the customer. At the time it was difficult to understand, but it's clear now where you could genuinely see confusion from the uninitiated. Rolex use lacquer to colour their dials, combining almost limitless freedom of colour with intensity and smooth finish that is applied similarly to how modern cars are painted. To achieve the sunray metallic dials, silver plating is used as a base layer for the sunray finish, where further colour is added to the prepared dial, sometimes through electroplating with more than half a dozen different metals. These amazing dials now feature double appliques on the 36 and 41mm models, all in white gold at the 3, 6 and 9 positions, in line with the previous 36mm model. Rolex's own chromolite is used for luminosity in dark conditions, giving the now familiar blue glow, and it's designed to have less luminosity than supernova, but lasts longer. Inside the case, the smaller models use Calibre 2232 with 55 hours of power reserve and a siloxy silicon hairspring for anti-magnetism. The 36 and 41mm models use Calibre 3230, which is a no-date version of the 3235 that has been in use in the Datejust 41 and now in the new Submariner. It uses Rolex's Parachrome hairspring for anti-magnetism and has a solid 70 hours of power reserve using the patented Chrome Energy escapement. This is said to increase efficiency by 15% for reduced wear on the traditional Swiss lever escapement, unlike Omega who have moved to the coaxial escapement for similar gains. So despite using two different movements, both are officially certified superlative chronometers and should be accurate to +2- seconds per day, where Rolex regulates the movement in the case. The Oyster case and bracelet use Rolex's own 904L steel for additional resistance to the elements and additional hardness. The bracelet itself is the traditional Oyster as used on the Submariner and Explorer, but with a clasp that doesn't feature the glide lock or safety latch of the professional range, but is still very nice, with an easy link comfort extension as fitted to the Datejust and GMT models. So I know what you want to know is, what do I think? Well, the fact that I was compelled to research and produce this episode is testament to how I felt about the watch when I initially tried it on. I started with the 36mm as I wore a 36mm Seamaster for nearly 20 years and I wanted to see how it wore. And despite the fetching turquoise or Tiffany blue dial, this watch felt small to me and in some way was vindication of moving the trusty Seamaster on to a new owner. The one I was drawn to was the yellow. Don't know why, it just made me smile. I hadn't long come back from Italy, so maybe thoughts of Ferrari, sunny days, the FP Journe Octosport I tried on last year in Philadelphia, I don't know, but something connects with me, and sometimes that's all that matters. Now none of these are cheap, but at £4,700 I was thinking my GMT is toast, making the gap a little more manageable. So we then get to the availability question, and I ask, what's the wait time on these? And I get the very Rolex like, well sir, we're advertising about 2 years at the moment. So Rolex has wowed us with this watch that looks good and is on the affordable side of decadent, but in an instant added to the now unobtainable list of professional models. So it's no surprise to see these trading for over list. For me, I'll keep wearing the Tudor GMT for now and see what next year brings. I've grown to respect Rolex as a brand for the no compromise approach to design and manufacture, and as an engineer I can appreciate that, but unless I happen to be out one day and come across one of these in a shop window, I'll be moving on to the next shiny thing that takes my fancy. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed researching and making it. And if you feel the same way, please give it a thumbs up and leave your comments below. So, I'm Andy, this has been The English Watch. Take care and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.